Hello, and welcome to Mondays on Tuesdays podcast. I have been thinking and kind of, I don't know, I've had two realizations that I feel like are so massive, I just kind of I don't know what to do with them. It's almost like I'm looking out from the top of like a mountain or a very large hill at a big meadow, just take it in like wow. And they're two concepts that are profoundly strange and potentially un-American. And here's what they are. It's the question of, does capitalism need to change or does it just need to be put in its place? And the second one is, does leadership matter, or have the best things in our society always been the ones that don't really have leaders and you can't really point to who's leading them? And in a money obsessed leaders which leaders do you follow culture of America, these are both like either take the air out of the sails of everything, or completely free everything up in a wonderful way. And to deepen the idea of, does capitalism need to be changed or just put in its place, it's kind of like, if everything economic was underneath the justice system, which makes sense. You shouldn't be able to buy your way out of crimes you've committed. And then if the justice system was underneath democracy, because anything that affects people, they should have a say in. And I think generally the worst things in society, I mean, obviously, like, the thing that's so funny talking about society is like, I'm one person. Right? Like, I don't get to run around the world or run back and forwards in time throughout history and figure out what worked and what didn't work, or even what works for other people. And so I can only talk from my own experience, which is, I can't understand fully what other people's needs are. I can't even fully understand what my needs are half the time, more than half the time, most of the time. And so the idea that there could be people in parts of the country that I don't understand and things that affect all of us should be democratically voted on makes complete sense. And then I have interacted with selfish people. I have been selfish myself, and I can totally understand why it's dangerous for a special interest anyone to have a say in something that affects everybody that those other people don't have a say in. So the idea of democracy sitting on top of criminal justice and then criminal justice sitting on top of the economy, it makes sense as this whole idea of, like, we talk about the economy, the economy, the economy, and like, does this get funded? Does that get funded? Like, socialism, capitalism, communism, what are all the isms? And at the end of the day, it's kind of like, no amount of money is going to make you feel good. Like, it shouldn't be everything. And if it's not everything, and it's just, something in the middle, then it would be fine. It's only because it sits on top of everything that it's causing problems. And then the other idea about, leaderless societies is like, who who leads mathematics? Who leads law? Even like, who leads government? Like, there's been a long time since the, founding fathers of America made a constitution, even if you like the constitution. I imagine people don't, which is why we always talk about the amendments. I mean, what would happen if an author wrote a book and then the only thing people really liked about the book was the edits that the editor changed? Would we value that author? No. And when I look at, like, psychology and, physics and, transportation systems, manufacturing processes, there actually isn't an individual person you can point to and say, that person led it. It's been people building on other people's things. And so I'm gonna unpack this a little bit of why we're so obsessed with leadership skills in a world that has been harmed by our infatuation with leaders, and most of our best stuff comes from, massive collective works. Back after the break. So part of this recording started with a conversation I was having with a friend, and they were super upset that like all the all the martyrs and visionaries over time have been murdered, and yada yada yada. And it's kind of like the Bob Marley lyric, "How long will they kill our prophets? While we stand aside and look." But I got to thinking, is that actually where profits come from? Because like if I build something, train someone, tell someone something, and they build someone something, train someone, tell someone something, and then somebody elsewhere in that industry or in society picks up what I have and works on it. Just because you can't pinpoint one person who was rocking the boat doesn't mean that those aren't the best people or the best things. And when I think about computer science, there's no like single person who invented computer science. I mean, you could say, Turing did a lot. You could say the team from Bell Labs that wrote the C language, they did a lot. You could say there were things that happened in the early days of Microsoft. You could say, Linus Torvalds in the Linux kernel, or the various BSD teams, FreeBSD, NetBSD, the TCP/IP stuff. Like you can point to things, but that's kind of like pointing to the transmission in a car and being like, this is it, right? Or pointing to the combustion engine being like, this is it. And then someone be like, well, no, back when they made synthetic oil so that gears could turn, so they could create the printing press, which eventually, became made in the combustion engine. Like, that was it. It was the invention of synthetic oil. And it's kind of like, when I think about the people that have, rocked the apple cart so badly that they got knocked off, I mean, I think that guy way back in the day who, broke it to the religious leaders that the earth actually revolves around the sun. The earth is not the center. I think he was killed, and like the guy who invented hand washing died in prison, and like and then you could, move into modern times, you have MLK, John Lennon, and we can look at that and be afraid of sticking our necks out and making a difference. Or you can consider that in a discipline like psychology, you have Jungian, you have Freudian, you have various people who are known for having these huge impacts. But when I read the DSM, and especially looking how it's changed, especially from version 4 to version 5, it was actually a lot of psychologist and psychiatrist experience with patients and sort of the complexity of the overlaps. And I was listening to something about how they're trying to rearrange the personality disorder section, and I thought, woohoo, my section. But basically, it's because there's a lot of overlap, and they now have a wealth of clinical diagnostic history. And and it looks like a discipline like psychology, a discipline like mathematics. I'm not going to talk about economics because I hate some of the things that have happened in that discipline, but um, it isn't really a single person who like, yay, I did it. And I think about that a lot in this like obsession with leaders and leadership skills, and it's kind of like I don't actually know if being a visionary is a good thing, because I think people can solve problems when presented with circumstances far better when they are forced to conform to someone's vision. So I'm kind of adopting this inside out view of the most effective companies don't have some visionary dickhead at the top holding everybody back. They actually just don't really have a strong leader. And and this kind of reminds me of the chapter in Good to Great, which is a fantastic book I will link to in the bottom. And it's a team of researchers who wrote this book. And there's a chapter called Level 5 Leadership, and it basically talks about how you need someone who's like somewhat beta to manage the alphas, because otherwise, the superstar C-level people will just won't get along. If you have one more, big head at the top, it just like waters everybody down. It doesn't, set them free and let them solve problems. And so the leaders of the successful companies they interviewed were statistically more likely to accept press interviews or appear on the cover of magazines, because that's not who they were, right? They weren't the people who wanted fame. And they then were massively more successful as as their companies were massively more successful. It's ironic. I can't even stop saying the word leaders, but as CEOs of these companies, the companies were more productive and they were less obsessed with fame. So that's an interesting look at things. And then, I mentioned in the intro that, money just kind of needs its place, which is like an accounting layer around stuff, right? Like it summarizes stuff. It helps us transact, goods and services, values and things like that. But money in and of itself isn't a thing any more than like words on a page are a thing. I mean, like books are not measured by how many words they have. They're always used to, explain ideas or communicate information, and it's the information they're communicating that's wonderful, and that's all linking into what the reader already knows and what the author knows. And so the actual book itself is not the valuable part; it's what the book explains. And when I say, money is not valuable, it's just a layer on top of things. There's so many emotions associated with money, as like there's so much like moral judgment and purpose and power and status. And so I want to take this to something similar to it, but not exactly, which is mathematics. So what if there was such a society that decided that math was valuable because it was math, right? Like not the idea that math was used to figure things out and math was used to analyze things and summarize things. For some reason, this society decided math was its own value. And the real question here is what value does math have until it's applied to something? And the answer is none. And I think that's kind of where we are in terms of our positioning of money. It's that people generate wealth and then money accounts for it. People solve problems and become part of things that have money, and then the money is how you account for it. And this whole idea of your money is working for you, no, there are people working for the money that you're paying them. And this is a really interesting concept. So imagine you had like all the money in the world. Like what would you want, right? Because no matter how much money I do or don't have, I want good food, good sex, good time with people I love, decent place to live, interesting adventures, and some entertainment, right? So if you had tons and tons of money, what would you do? Would you buy an entire national park? Because if you did that, you'd probably put some ugly ass fucking building on there and then want to buy another one. And how would the parks people take care of the park for you? Make sure, it didn't burn down, make sure, it was maintained. Who would put trails in there? You're gonna wander around in the wilderness? And so what you quickly realize is that there's absolutely nothing you can buy that is not determined on interaction, maintenance, effort, relationships, right? The most convenient thing to do is buy, a tiny little house, pretend you're anonymous, and just like, do nothing. And that sounds really boring. But this whole idea that money can, in and of itself, do things without knowledge and interaction and expertise and trust and sacrifice and really giving up people who make decisions who have more experience in something than you or more capability, it really makes it look like the myth of extreme wealth delivering the experiences that the human soul craves is pretty fucking wrong. And when I combine that with the idea that it's not leaders who really make a difference, it's people who face a circumstance and they begin working on something, and then they hand what they're working on to someone else, then they hand what they're working on to someone else. It's kind of like some of the most indisputably visible projects in modern society are transportation projects, highway systems, train systems. If you go back in time enough, there were actually cathedrals that were started and finished 100 years apart. So generations of humans were adding bricks to foundations that were started before they were born. And some of these cathedrals, I saw one of them in England, they're very ornate, very interesting constructed. And it begs this question: what do humans do that outlives us, right? What do we do that spans beyond our lifespan? And very little of it has to do with leadership and leadership skills. And so I think the idea of helping, contributing, and building upon what's already around it, and more importantly, providing something that other people can build upon. So here's an interesting example. I have been at a number of companies where training is just not good. It's like it's hard to figure things out. You basically have to do things wrong and hope somebody sees you and corrects you. And at times I'm trained not so sufficiently, or I even wonder why I can't ask the person around me for training. They say, oh, well, I'm new here, or I wasn't ever really shown. And so the concept is that, to me, good training is this. Here's the bar on good training. If someone is not trained to the ability to train the next person, they have not been properly trained. And here's what's really interesting about that. If I train someone to be as good at training the next person as me, they could very easily become better than me at something. And that's the point, right? If you're not training people to be able to train the next person, you're likely somewhat afraid that they will run away with it, or become better than you. And if you do train them to train the next person, what you're doing is saying, I take my power as a trainer and I anoint and empower you with it, and now you may run with it. And that sounds like a dream, but let's take a simpler example. When someone makes plans with me, or I make plans with them, what I'm essentially saying is, I am not going to let that day be subject to the whims of my human unpredictability. I'm going to stick to that date and make sure I show up. And guess what happens in that situation? I'm not in control, right? I've agreed with another person that we will both be taking direction from our calendars. And I think we all know people who are somewhat narcissistic, who are always like, well, I don't know, can't we change it? I'm just running a little late. Can I meet you a few minutes later? Or they're the kind of person who, no matter what is asked of them, they always sort of dodge it just a bit, just so you need to rely on them for permission to do the next thing. And this is very obviously like a selfish narcissistic thing, where someone needs to be the focus of attention and they cannot commit to plans with other people. And when I look deeply at that concept of plans with other people, it's the relinquishing of control, because it's saying, I'm going to give this written commitment and that time control over my life, and now I'm serving it. And guess what else follows this pattern, interestingly? Plans and job definitions in writing. So if someone's managing a company and they put the processes of the company very clearly in writing, everyone can see them and say, well, I'm not sure that's how you do it. I'm not sure that's how you do it. And if something goes wrong and people followed the plan, there's nothing to blame other than the plan. And so I found, in sort of working in post-COVID tech world, we had to write things down because we weren't all in the office. And I actually found that it was awesome, because it made people relinquish control by putting a plan in writing. And that's kind of the beginning of, in my opinion, that's really the beginning of building upon someone else's work without them necessarily needing to be around, involved, and without them being a bottleneck. And so I think this idea of obsessing over money being everything, it's kind of like, no, money just accounts for normal stuff. Like it's life and the meaning of life and the experience of life that matters, and money is just the layer on top of it that we use to keep track of stuff. And then I think we need to replace leadership skills with organizational skills in terms of what we value, because so much more of value, look at, the legal system, agriculture, and our ability to, produce food, even though, we could use some nutritional upgrades in our diet and the way we produce food. But there's so many human accomplishments that are amazing, that really happened and continue to happen in sort of decentralized, evolving discipline ways. And so if we replace our obsession with money with our obsession with what matters in life and how to, accomplish that using money, how to make sure the operations of what we value is taken care of using accounting. And if we move to a place where we're not so focused on leadership skills and visionaries, and instead we're focused on extending disciplines and creating, wealth and techniques and, bodies of work and getting to know who we are as people and, contributing to, great literary works. I think that things will stabilize and be wonderful. And yeah, it's kind of funny to think back to all the obsessions with like leadership skills and just be like, oh man, like honestly, the best way to run a company is to stop obsessing about, the leaders. Just just let them go. Um, anyway, that wraps up the episode and my thoughts. And um, yeah, if you'd like to know more about what I'm up to or sort of um, I don't know, anything. More information at firecrow.com, and I'll record another one of these soon.